Do you ever look at games now and again and think to yourself, man, whatever happened to the games that I used to like? The ones that nobody seems to remember. Well, I know exactly what happened to them. No one remembers them. And these are the top 7 greatest games that time forgot. Good games, superb games, exceptional games. That if you were to ask the random person on the street about these games, you would be hit in the face several times because you accosted someone in the street and started asking strange questions without a camera, so they knew it wasn't a prank, bro, or something. But they would not be able to identify these as games, probably. Oh sure, within their own niche communities, yeah, they may still be popular. I'm even in one of the groups dedicated to one of these games, but to the gaming world at large, they're really not that popular, known, or existent. They're just forgotten. That being said, let's get started with number 7, Oni. Much can be said about how bland the level design was in Oni, or how sad it was that it cut pieces out of the game, or that there's no multiplayer officially, but the combat system made up for everything. You could punch and kick your way to fun and mayhem, and come back again because it was so goddamn enjoyable. And that's what people have been doing for decades, because there's no sign of this ever getting a proper revival due to the legal issues of who owns it. I mean, it's technically part of, well, the sequel is part of Rockstar and Take-Two, but the original is sort of still a bit, I think, Microsoft-ish and Bungie. There's not going to be a remake of it anytime soon is what I'm saying, and the sequel, well, they tried it. At some point, Rockstar or Take-Two tried to make a sequel and it didn't work out, so they quit, and pretty much nobody remembers Oni outside of the people that played it. It hasn't been a part of the general culture for some time, so that when Don't Nod made a really crappy rip-off of it called Remember Me, no one remembered Oni and called them out on it. Well, I did, but they just complained, oh, the game didn't sell well because it was crap. Number 6, Interstate 76. Vehicle combat games got a bit of a resurgence a couple of years ago when people were trying left and right to create the next Carmageddon. Many of these were failures. The only success I would say is the Gas Guzzler series. Pretty much everything else was a disaster, which is sad because it was a good time to, bring back Interstate, but nobody brought back Interstate. This wasn't just any kind of vehicle combat game. This was one that really tried its best to be a bit of a simulator. I mean, it was built on a very, very heavily modified version of the MechWarrior 2 engine, which, as you know, is a game about piloting giant robots in a way that makes it feel like you're simulating the game experience of piloting a giant robot, and it's not just some arcade crap. And it was an exquisite game. You had muscle cars with machine guns. They would drive in some around American place that's a thing there in the 70s, and it had that 70s style to it with coolness just oozing out of it, and cars oozing things out of them too, because you shot them, you have a machine gun strapped to the hood, or to the roof actually, it depends on the car. Yeah, it had its sequel set in the 80s that didn't do so well. It had a console version called Vigilante 8 at one time that also didn't do so well, and it's available on GOG, which is something that I can't say about the majority of the titles on this show right now. So it's something, but it's not remembered that much, is it? When people think vehicle combat, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, the fantastic Interstate series. No, it's Carmageddon? No, it's probably Rocket League, even though it's not a vehicle combat. Or at best, Twisted Metal, which was not as good. There, I said it. It was also a very different game, so comparing the two really doesn't do justice to either of them. Number 5, Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse. Stubbs the Zombie was a goddamn treasure unto mankind that should be fondly remembered by everybody, and everybody should still be able to play it, but they're not. They can't. It's nowhere. It was made before the zombie craze. It was made years before it, and it is the best one there is. It's the best zombie game we ever got, because unlike all the other zombie games, you don't shoot the zombies. You are the zombie. You make more zombies. You pretty much destroy an entire city semi-unintentionally at first, using your zombie nature, your zombie powers, your zombie horde, and the stupidity of the people that are living there and also their machines. This game had, again, a style to it. It was trapped in the bubble of those 50s, 60s idealized America, filled with Nazis, of course. All the robots were built by a Nazi. It had humor, it had style, it had you tearing out your pancreas and throwing it at people where it exploded, you bowling with your head, you using your hand, your amputated hand to just roam around and possess people. And again, you were making armies of zombies and sending them against the army and pretty much anybody that went in your path. At one time, just because all you wanted to do was take a leak in the city's water reservoir, because Stubbs was also an asshole. Number 4. Freedom Fighters. IO Interactive was known for 2 games back in the day, Hitman and Freedom Fighters. Then they had Mini Ninjas, which is okay, and Ken and Lynch, which let's not go there, but they never went back to Freedom Fighters. Heck, they could now, they're independent. Wait, Electronic Arts does own it, so they'll probably buy IO Interactive and ruin it. So Freedom Fighters is forgotten. People really don't talk about it much at all. But if it were to be remembered and get a sequel, I fear that Electronic Arts would ruin Interactive in the process. So maybe it's better that people don't remember it. But it's sad at the same time because it was a story about America being invaded. But unlike stupid stuff like, oh, it's North Korea, no. This was an alternate history. I mean, it was also stupid when Turning Point Fall of Liberty did the alternate history thing because that was a bad game. But this wasn't a bad game, this was a great game. Russia did really well in World War II, and at one point decided, you know what, we're gonna invade USA, but not in the stupid way like in Modern Warfare 2, and for actual reasons, because it was a planned invasion. Yeah, they came off a bit as comedic bastards, what with them saying things on television like, the prisoners will be given a fair trial and then executed. But it was still a kick-ass kind of game. You're playing guerrilla warfare as one of the Mario brothers, Luigi I think. You had underground base, you had weapons you would collect, you had some upgrades I think you could get, or at least more weapons. You had missions that would intertwine with one another where you could disable something in one mission to make another mission easier. You had a limited squad system that you let you command other people, well, just tell them where to go and what to do. Oh, and you had ragdoll physics in the era where ragdoll physics were a newish thing and the greatest thing ever. And in this game they were so fun, they were cute, they were cuddly, they were amazing. You would just shoot things and see where they exploded everywhere. It was so fun. I think there was even a sort of stealth system in it. It was a good game, and now it's well, it isn't. It sure isn't. Number 3, the Laura Bow games. How forgotten are these games? These 2 games, the Dagger of Amon-Ra and At the Colonel's Bequest? Well, let me put it to you this way. I am a fan of adventure games. Had no idea these 2 existed until I saw a show about them on Pushing Up Rose's channel. And they're right up my alley. They're mystery type games in the vein of Broken Sword, but a lot older. The first one was made in 89 and then in 92 got a sequel. They're about Laura Bow, journalist, who goes around getting into trouble, investigating things, witnessing gruesome, oh gosh, golly, that's gruesome murders. And the old Sierra game style, meaning you're gonna have to type a lot, in the first one at least, and then you probably have deaths, like your own character can die. And I had no idea they existed. Me, imagine how that makes me feel. And if I at least put an effort into knowing games, pretty much nobody else knows about them, do they? Which is sad because they're really nice games. And thankfully they can be bought on GOG, so people can still enjoy them if they know they exist, which they don't. I know there's been some obscure Sierra Online games, but these were surprisingly obscure, even though they're good. Number 2, Nocturne. Back in the heyday of the horror survival genre, when there is still a kind of horror and survival in them, not just Resident Evil's continuous ludicrousness, there was a studio called Terminal Reality. Yes, the same people that brought us Blood Rain. But before that, way before that, they brought us Nocturne. Yeah, it was clunky as hell. It was one of those games where you would play basically like in Resident Evil with a fixed camera. Thankfully, you had lasers on your guns, so you would see where you were aiming. It was a bit clunky at times to play. I don't think they had a budget for music, so they just used public domain music. Good public, like the kind of public domain music you would associate with horror. But that's beside the point. Nocturne was a good enough game, in my opinion, because it had style, it had a mood. The story was that you were the stranger, some badass monster hunter that worked for an organization, a government-backed one called the Spook House, which recruited sort of different different individuals. I think there was a Frankenstein at one point, and Dampiers, and one of them was either a demon or a gargoyle, and Rain, from Blood Rain was there too, only her name was Svetlana Lupescu, but it was the same character, dressed almost exactly the same, only I think she was a brunette back then. And you would go on several adventures as the stranger. There were 4 levels, and after you did them all, you would have an extra level. And they were all spread through different periods of time. You had one in the 20s, you had them in the 30s and the 40s. It sort of gave you a sense that this was a bigger world, that there could be more things in it. It reminded me a bit of the Hellboy universe, because they had their own organization and that too spanned through many ages, and they would be fighting different threats, supernatural or Nazis at one time I think. And it was the same with Nocturne. You would go from German castles to the Wild West to sort of a prequel to Guns, Gore, and Cannoli. You would fight in Chicago, and over the course you'd learn more about the characters that were in the spook house that you would see before the missions. You would be dragged deeper into this world, into the lore, into the atmosphere, and it was superb. And it ended with a big cliffhanger that hasn't been resolved in almost 20 years, and it never will be. Terminal reality doesn't exist. The rights for Nocturne are probably at Take-Two, which again is kind of unlikely to actually do anything with them ever, because why would they? It's Nocturne. It's not even as big a blip on the radar as Oni was. And number 1 is Sim Everything Else. Ask anybody that's played The Sims, anybody that's played SimCity, the last one I mean, last 2 ones even. Ask them if they know of any other sim game. They would probably tell you that no, they know of no other sim game. Maybe Spore? Was that a sim game? And that is so sad, so incredibly sad, because there were so many of them. There was Sim Earth, which was kind of like Sport. There was Sim Ant, there was Sim Life, Sim Farm, Sim Tower, which wasn't made by Maxis, but it was still part of the Sim family. You had Sim Park, you actually had 2 Sim Golfs, one of them from 96 and one from 2002, which I'm gonna cover later this week. It was made by Sim Mario. You had Sim Copter, you had Sim Coaster that I never actually heard about until now. You had an incredible variety of sim games, all trying to do their own thing, their own niche, and it was an amazing franchise at one point, but they stopped. They just made SimCity, one that sucked, the last one that being, and then The Sims, and then nothing. They killed it, and they buried it, and none of the old ones are remembered now. Why would they be? They tried something new. They tried something different. They tried to breathe life into new ideas and new genres and push simulation farther than it ever went. Sort of. Okay, not all of them were the greatest games ever, but some of them were just astonishing. But again, if you were to ask anybody today about the Sim series, they would just think about The Sims and maybe SimCity. All the others lost in the wind, like tears in the rain, like a good franchise in the hands of Electronic Arts. So ends this edition of the Top 7, dedicated to the best games that time forgot. A few special mentions should probably be given to Meridian 59, which was an MMO before MMOs were named MMOs. The Sacrifice, which was an RTS action game from the glory days of Shiny. I think it was made by Shiny, not Planet Moon. The Severance, the Blade of Darkness, I'd give it a bit, but since the Severance-like genre is still alive and well these days, I don't think it's warranted. I mean, everybody calls it the Severance-like genre, right? They don't call it something else, right? And of course, that one game that was so good at its time and now is so ignored by everyone and hardly even remembered. I've got no clue what it's called, but I think you're gonna tell me in the comments. So please share with me, what's your favorite game? What do you think is the greatest game that nobody remembers? Goodbye.